I mean this. I know you want it, I can see it in your eyes. So get up on it like you going for a prize. Once we get the fire started, no one survives. We gon' burn it all night.
Right, let's jump straight into the EQ primer. This tutorial is not aimed at providing you in-depth or detailed content. It's simply there to introduce you to equalization. Now, EQ is one of my favorite tools, especially when it comes to creating space in a mix or correcting problem frequencies, creating new textures from existing sounds, and defining the overall delivery and frequency balance of a mix, and so on. Without a doubt, one of the most important tools an engineer has at their disposal. What it is, how to use it, and when to use it, which one to use and which is the best for the given task, and most importantly, what frequencies cover certain sounds when preparing to EQ, are the areas I'll cover in ensuing video tutorials. In this primer video, the most important questions to cover are: what is EQ, how it came to be, how does it work, and what are the different types on offer. Now, if you require in-depth reading material coupled with before and after audio examples, then I recommend that you take a look at my EQ Uncovered ebook, or if you prefer, the hard copy print is available from PC Publishing. Okay, let's kick off with what is EQ and how it snuck up on us. EQ is a processor which uses filters to alter the balance of frequencies in a sound. This is achieved by using a number of filter circuits which apply positive or negative gain to selected frequency ranges. And a good way to explain that is to simply show you here. These are frequency bands, as we call them. So the positive gain here is called boost. Negative gain is called cut. Another word for cut is attenuation. Now, this is as simplistic as you can get. In fact, this definition has helped me considerably, particularly when I was a beginner. Now, let's look at the first ever instances of equalization. Now, they were used in the communications industry. EQ was used to counteract some of the problems in telephone systems, particularly in correcting frequency anomalies in line lengths. It then transgressed into the broadcasting industry, and so on. Tone controls were created and used to compensate technical inaccuracies in the recording chain, more notably compensating for microphone coloration and room acoustics. EQ was used as a means of controlling the gain of a range of frequencies. We'll come to that again in a minute when we come to different types of EQ. This form of equalization, i.e. the one that was to do with the communications industry, is called corrective or compensatory EQ. And it's still used today to compensate for poor room acoustics or rooms with an acoustical frequency bias. It can act as a half-measure stopgap for monitoring in a truer sense, i.e. what goes in and what comes out. Now, in those early days, the standard bass, middle and treble gain control were all we had. Today we're actually spoilt for choice, as there are so many parameters that we can control in any type of EQ that it has actually become quite confusing for the beginner and experienced users. Now, the process of EQ can be split into two distinct themes: corrective and creative equalization. Let me briefly explain what each one is. Corrective equalization is used to correct any anomalies that may exist in a sound, removing noise, rumble, etc., abating problematic frequencies, compensating for room inaccuracies, etc. However, precision EQ tasks will require corrective methods as opposed to creative ones. A good example of this would be to use corrective EQ to separate frequencies in a mix. Corrective EQ is also used at the mastering stage to compensate and accommodate frequencies that would otherwise render the master as unacceptable. In other words, the mastering engineer will use corrective EQ to create a master suitable for the desired medium. Of course, creative EQ techniques also play a part, but first and foremost, the master must be as correct as possible with consideration for the entire frequency spectrum of the master. Creative equalization is used to color a sound or to reshape its characteristics to create a new sonic template. It's also used in a wider context to manipulate a range of frequencies, such as in a mix, to attain a new color. A good example of this would be to use EQ to make a mix more dynamic at the lower and higher frequencies in the event that the mix is geared for the club scenes. In many cases, a good hardware EQ can act as a medium to warm sound in a way that software-based EQs cannot, although today they're closing that gap considerably. We'll touch on this later, as the subject of hardware versus software seems to be a thorny subject discussed at length by engineers and MEs alike. So don't worry about that, we will cover that. From corrective EQ, we've come a long way to creative EQ. The natural progression from a corrective tool to a creative one is not uncommon in the technological world, and none more so than the audio and communications industries, which seem to share a great deal with each other. I don't want to bore you with the history of EQ or who invented what. You can trawl the internet for some excellent articles on this subject. What I want to do is dive in and get you started on this detailed and confusing subject. Short of going into electronics designs, it is safe to say that the simplest form of EQ was to cut frequencies, as they were based on passive technology. Using high pass and low pass filtering, you're able to cut the low and high frequencies. In the early passive systems, there were no amps in there to boost anything. There were simply resistors, capacitors, and they acted as cuts. So all you were really able to do was to cut low or high frequencies. So let's just jump into a very quick example here using this passive equalizer. Forget the presence section here. That's an additional tool. We don't need that for now. But let's just get into this, the high and low cuts. Now, Softtube, one of my favorite companies, I must say, they make some lovely, lovely emulation plugins. I've included an amplifier section here, so we can boost as well. What we'll do is we'll jump into an example here using a piano line. Have a listen to this in bypass mode, and then I'll quickly switch it on to real time, and then we'll adjust the knobs. Ignore the presence section. This is an additional tool that Softtube provided. So have a quick listen. Now if I drop out of the bypass mode, hear the difference in the sound. So let's twiddle some knobs. You can hear what's happening when I'm cutting and boosting the frequencies. Boosted the highs there and cut the lows. We boosted the low, let's cut the high. I love this particular plugin from Softtube. I think it is so rich.
I mean this. I know you want it, I can see it in your eyes. So get up on it like you going for a prize.